In 1 week, Virginia's 2010 General Assembly will convene, and our legislators will face the challenges of leading the Commonwealth. Tonight, an editorial roundtable. This is What Matters. Happy New Year and welcome to the first broadcast of the new calendar year. I'm Cathy Lewis. So what could be a more fitting way to get the start on the new year than by checking in with our sharp and sassy editorial roundtable? Joining us this week, Virginian pilot political reporter Julian Walker. We're glad to have him back with us. Don Luzzatto has risen from his sickbed, is all restored to good health, the editorial page editor of the Virginian Pilot. Democratic blogger Vivian Paige is full of lots of different ideas and lots of news. And Republican blogger Brian Kirwin is with us as well, all set for the inauguration in Richmond at mid-month. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm glad you're feeling better, my friend. You really had a bout of it, didn't you?
I did. I was just one of 5 Luzzattos who were sick for about a month.
But you had pneumonia and the H1N1.
That was the suspicion.
So, it wasn't election day that did it.
It wasn't election day. It came a month later. So.
Well, there's so much to get to tonight. We need an hour tonight. That's kind of where we are. But let's start out with this business at Hampton Roads Transit, because my goodness, there's been lots of news about this week. Pretty dramatic cost overruns, and then late in the week, news that an apparent case of embezzlement that was resolved earlier had not been reported to the board. Don Luzzatto, you all have editorialized pretty significantly on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what seems to bother most of the members of the commission, or the members of the commission who are bothered, is that they haven't been kept informed. They were not informed until December that they were $50 million behind again for the second straight year, and now they find that $80,000 went missing and nobody told them. So I think they've got a problem with how well they're being informed about what's going on in their agency.
And so the question is whether Michael Towns survives this. Some have suggested that he shouldn't have, that it wasn't fair to give one person both the management of HRT and the management of the light rail project, and I suppose that's a conversation we should have. But the question is whether he survives this.
If it's not about personalities, it's not about who people are, and it's totally about the facts and the job that was done, he should be gone. I've written on Bearing Drift about it quite extensively too, and for once Don and I are of like minds there. If this was in the private sector, he'd be gone already.
Yeah.
47% cost overruns. The embezzlement wasn't even, it was on the HRT side. The embezzlement of $80,000 wasn't even light rail. This is pretty systemic, so it's not just a light rail problem. But when the Virginia Beach City Council puts forth a resolution they'll be voting on at their next meeting saying, if the CEO is still around, we're out. Light rail stops at our border and goes no further. That's pretty strong language. I don't see how a CEO survives that.
Virginia Beach is right now a fairly small part of HRT, relatively to its actual size. But if light rail were to come to Virginia Beach, it's suddenly the biggest part of HRT. And I'd be surprised if there's one vote against this resolution calling for Towns to be fired in Virginia Beach. I'm not sure if there was a vote on Norfolk City Council that there would be more than a couple votes in support of him. I don't know how you survive when the 2 largest cities in your service area want you gone.
Vivian?
I don't think that he should survive. I think he probably will, but I don't think, given what we've seen from HRT, what's been going on with the cost overruns, the $80,000 is just icing on the cake. The guy should be gone, but it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Why do you say that?
Politically, it's just not going to happen. I mean, there will be a lot of stuff that will go on they'll talk about how you can put controls in place, how these other people will be brought in to oversee the project. He's not going anywhere.
That's a conversation that actually was had last January. There were issues with pilings. You'll recall we did a show about it nearly a year ago. January 29th, I think, was the air date, and we pulled a bit of that interview of Michael Towns responding to those concerns at that point about cost overruns.
you do pre-construction surveys and you do them with professional firms and you give them professional direction. They have to meet a standard of care, but that standard of care doesn't guarantee that they'll find all unforeseen conditions, therefore you have contingencies. What has happened in this case is well within the contingencies. It doesn't increase the total cost of the project in our projections of project completion. We will take a very hard look at what this engineering contractor did to see if it indeed met the standard of care as was preliminarily indicated. If they did not perform correctly, we'll take the recourses that are necessary on behalf of the public. I want people to know that these are difficult projects. When we get into the streets of downtown Norfolk, there will be other things that arise, hopefully not as apparently embarrassing as this.
So that was a year ago. Now we're told at that point that appropriate action would be taken. Now we're a year later, more cost overruns. Right. How does it happen that if he survives this, you've got what Don just outlined, which is a situation where Virginia Beach is saying, we're not going to extend the light rail.
I think they'll pull, like I said, they'll put in people. They'll put in layers. They've brought in some of these consultants who actually, the city has brought in people. That's how they'll control it.
But that's not going to be good enough. It's not just about cost. It's about communication.
And it's about confidence.
Trust and confidence.
It is.
You're right.
It is.
And Virginia, I mean, light rail without Virginia Beach is as good as an HOV lane for bicycles. It's just not going to do anything. It's not going to carry anybody.
I think this is a big story, and I think I think it has tremendous implications for all the reasons that you've indicated. In terms of this confidence thing, it's significant. We do this show every day at noon, and I hear people calling all the time and saying, look, you talk about transportation, you talk about adding more money to transportation, but until you show me that you can be reasonable with those expenditures, I got a trust problem with this. I know that trust is probably not the bulk of your reporting, Julian Walker, but I wonder what you're hearing and reporting about all of this.
Well, as the non-editorial person on this panel, I'll probably refrain from making a statement about whether or not Mr. Towns should or will or won't go, but I think Brian makes a very valid point that anytime you're dealing with public dollars and the person who is responsible for management or is perceived to be responsible for the management and distribution of those public dollars is seen not to be doing a good job with them, it's a problem in the mind of the public.
If he survives this thing, I think there's a whole different round of story that goes on after that.
We'll be back.
We'll be back, as you all always are. Well, let's talk a bit about Hampton Roads' own Bob McDonnell, getting ready for the big inauguration. Right. What does this mean, Julian Walker? What does it mean that we have a governor who spent time here in Hampton Roads as a delegate and spent a significant portion of at least the time of his life where he was raising his children right here in this community?
Well, the initial thought would be that it means that he's going to have familiarity with the concerns and the issues of this region. So if you're a resident of this area, that should be encouraging to you. At the same time, he, like all governors, are the governor of the entire state, and so that means that his view can't just be on the micro Hampton Roads level, it has to be on the macro Virginia level. So what it ultimately means, I think it remains to be seen. He has certainly spoken in strong support of doing something on transportation. I think there will be continued debate and continued analysis of whether or not his plans for transportation will actually work out. He repeatedly talks about 460 expansion. We'll see if that happens. He wants to do that as a public-private partnership with potential tolls on that road, so that's something to watch out for. Tolls are never a popular subject in this area. It remains to be seen. One thing that I've spoken with his transition team about is just how many people from Hampton Roads will end up in his administration. Right. So far, we've got two folks with direct ties. Lisa Hicks Thomas, who is a former Deputy Attorney General, who's going to be his Secretary of Administration, is one. And then just earlier this week, we had former Delegate Terry Suit, who's going to be the Assistant to the Governor for Commonwealth Preparedness, which is essentially the equivalent of the state's Department of Homeland Security. So two members of the cabinet from Hampton Roads so far, and there are two slots left.
More to come. Yeah. So what do we think about those appointments, and what do we think, Brian? He's your guy.
Well, the first thing I'm thinking of is we're going to see if the Senate of Virginia becomes the Senate of no, and if the Democrats would become the party of no. A lot of what Bob McDonnell ran on had passed the House. The Hampton Roads portion of his transportation plan passed the House 2 years in a row, during a special session and during the last session. It's going to be submitted again this year. It will probably pass the House with relative ease, probably on a bipartisan level like it did last year. It dies in Senate committees. So if Bob McDonnell's going to have to figure out how to work with a Democratic Senate to get anything to his desk.
And the Senate looks quite a bit different, at least in terms of Hampton Roads delegation, without Ken Stolley. Big election coming up. Tuesday that will deal with, I don't know why I keep thinking it's Saturday, it is Tuesday, that deals with this issue for lots of Republicans certainly were interested in that opportunity, and no Democrats till the very last minute, and then we got a Democratic candidate in that process. What do we think about that race? What are the implications there?
Well, I mean,
Ken Stolley was a real playmaker.
You can't replace Ken Stolley, and I think Jeff McWaters, who we endorsed on Friday, is the better of the two candidates in this race. But having said that, Stolley is leaving an enormous hole in this delegation, and his great strength was the ability to work with anybody to get things done. He was often fairly apolitical in getting stuff done. He was important to the passage of 3202, which was the last best hope for transportation funding in this region. So it'll be interesting to see how we fare without an advocate like him in the Senate.
Yeah, no kidding. And then, of course, Phil Hamilton being gone, too, out of the House of Delegates, which will be significant, and we'll see how that all works itself out. So the bills are already being filed. What do you see on the horizon here, Julian?
Well, I think one of the things that we'll be paying attention to is whether or not ethics reform has any chance of passage. That certainly became an issue late last year with the Phil Hamilton scandal, and that's certainly something that House Democrats are going to be pushing. Whether or not it has a chance, we don't know, particularly because Republicans increased their majority in the House of Delegates, which they already controlled. To Brian's point about the Senate being obstructionist, I think you can certainly expect that. Not only do we have the 8th Senate special election, but we also have a special election for Ken Cuccinelli's seat in Northern Virginia as well. Both of those, certainly the Virginia Beach seat is expected to be a Republican pickup. The Northern Virginia seat, a little less clear, but Democrats aren't as optimistic as you would expect in a Northern Virginia seat. So if the balance of power remains the same, I think you can expect Democrats to be obstructionists and to push for the things that they've pushed for before for transportation funding, namely the gas tax.
I think the 37th is a seat that Democrats obviously have a chance to pick up. But in the big broader sense, as far as whether the Senate is going to be the party of no, I understand one of the top priorities for the new governor will be bipartisan redistricting. The rubber meets the road when the Democrats in the Senate vote against bipartisan redistricting. There's going to be a whole lot of folks that's going to be pretty upset if that happens. I think that's probably the biggest. I haven't seen any pre-filed bills on ethics reform. There's nothing there yet.
What do you see in the pre-filed?
Nothing of any consequence.
Yeah.
There's only been.
I think there was some efforts around making seatbelt wearing a primary offense or some of that.
Yeah,
sort of
you
stuff
have that. You've got some tax relief for veterans that are in there. You've got some Bob Marshall bills that are.
A lot of perennial bills that you see.
Sure, absolutely.
You see all the time.
But here's the interesting thing, though. I mean, some of those perennial kind of social bills, those that deal with issues of choice and things of that sort that Bob Marshall likes to file, might those get a different reception with Bob McDonnell in the governor's mansion and with
they still can't get through the Senate.
Right.
And there are things like the trigger man rule that repeatedly gets vetoed, and now.
And the governor-elect has said that he will sign that bill.
So
there are some.
But they're not the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the budget. Nobody can figure out how that's going to turn out.
Yeah.
So
what's the number we're looking at now? Something like $4 billion additionally that has to be cut.
Right.
Where's he going to get that? I mean.
I don't know. Maybe he's got a bigger sofa than I do, but I can't imagine $4 billion is
on top of all the budget cuts that have already
right, and that's going to be there's going to be pain from everywhere.
Yeah. It feels like we're back in the Mark Warner administration.
Yeah, Brian will find it.
First year, but I'm going to give it to government. No, it was exactly almost cutting to the bone, as was said at our last round table. There's just no easy answer and no way to make anybody happy. This is grin and bear it and vote for a bunch of things you're not really happy to vote for.
So, go ahead.
We're also going to see, though, some additional spending in the area that you wouldn't expect.
Which is?
That is charter schools. The governor has made charter schools one of his 3 top priorities. There's some federal money available to fund charter schools, and so he intends to go after those dollars. So while we're looking at contraction just about every place else, if you can imagine of all the things, that we're looking at changing the law in Virginia to allow for more charter schools and actually having the dollars to fund them.
Do you consider that additional spending, though, or is that some people would make the argument that charter school spending is routing the per pupil dollars that go to public school?
You won't get any argument from me that it is a routing. What I'm saying, though, is that there is some dollars, there's some federal money available to fund the charter schools, and so by going after those federal dollars, and he has an opportunity to have a signature thing, if you will, that he can show that he's committed to education and pay back, and doesn't blow up the budget, and because everything else is going to be so dismal.
Remember, right after election night, there was much hay made about the fact that, or the idea that it was called the McDonnell effect, and Republicans all over the country were studying what went on here to see if they could sort of replicate that strategy across the country. Well, it's been about a month or so since that happened. I wonder, Brian Kirwin, what do you think about that?
The McDonnell effect, and the bowling effect, and the Cuccinelli effect, and I hate. Gosh, I'd love to sit here and say that McDonnell created a new way to campaign in Virginia, but he didn't. It's the impact of the independent voter, and I've been doing the lecture.
And a poorly run campaign on the other side.
Well, but still, Deeds could have run a great campaign. He still would have got walloped.
Oh, you still think? Yeah. Really?
Here's if you understand Virginia state politics, it's the power of the independent voter. Why? There's a large percentage of independent voters. They don't like either party, but they hate the party in power in Washington more.
Right.
And the independent voters suddenly vote for Republicans when there's a Democrat in the White House who makes them angry, and when there's a Republican in the White House that makes them angry, they vote for Democrats.
And we know that's true in Virginia. All you have to do is look at our voting history. It's been that way for 40 years. It's not as if this is something new. So it's not a surprise.
So it's not that we became more Republican or more Democrat. The independent shift.
But I think that does minimize that McDonnell was an excellent, ran an excellent campaign.
Yeah, he did.
He ran a moderate. He ran a campaign that appealed to those independents.
Correct.
And and his opponent ran one of the worst campaigns I've ever seen.
Yeah, but even if the Democrats had put up the rock star Mark Warner, think about a battle between Bob McDonnell and Mark Warner. Would Mark Warner have won that race?
It would have been closer.
Oh, anybody would have been closer. I would have been closer.
Says the Democratic blogger.
It would have been closer, but that's not saying anything. It's all relative terms. I'm saying, look at Mark Warner and tell me if you honestly believe that Mark Warner could have won that race.
Interesting question.
I'm waiting for Mark Warner's first radically centrist vote.
He's giving you plenty.
Well, speaking of the national level, we have a very interesting race shaping up in the 2nd Congressional District.
Ah, yeah.
Congressman Nye is being challenged all over the place. Yes. All over the place. What, 6?
Rightfully so.
Why do you say rightfully so?
You run as a Democrat, you have to vote like a Democrat. And Nye is getting exactly what he deserves when he votes against the Democratic Party on the major issues.
Such as?
Healthcare, the budget, cap and trade. Those are the 3 big issues. The guy who just switched parties down in Georgia, do you know he actually voted more with the Democratic Party than does Glenn Nye?
So
what I'm saying, I'm just saying that you've got a situation whereby candidates have to understand that you can play in a district and you can play a moderate in the district, but once in a while you have to throw the base a bone. You have to vote with the base, because the base is going to be the ones that are going to provide you with your startup dollars. They're the ones that are going to provide you with your campaign workers. They're the ones that are going to do all those things for you. The other folks may vote for you, but those guys are not going to be out there knocking doors for you.
I think it'll be a real test of where the middle is, because Nye has really he has voted as a Republican on some of these votes. He is
on all of those
votes. Does he really have a choice in the district he's in?
Yes.
Vivian's an expert at this, and she will tell you. He's following the Pickett model. He doesn't have Pickett's district.
That's the problem.
Okay.
That's the problem. He thinks that district looks different from the way it looks. And so, as a result, he is stubbing his toe.
Yeah, Owen Pickett had the 2nd. It's been redistricted since.
That's exactly
right. A different
right.
district than it was back then.
It has, but Virginia as a whole is somewhere in that moderate middle. He has voted so far in that moderate middle.
No, he hasn't.
Well, I think he has.
He really hasn't. Show me on the 3 big votes Show me how that's a moderate vote.
He voted against the stimulus too.
Yeah. That's what he voted. He has consistently voted against. You can be moderate. He likes to claim that he votes with Democrats 80-some% of the time. Okay, fine. Those are those votes where all 435 people voted the same way.
And half the Republicans did too.
That's what I mean. So he has not had a moderate voting record.
So you say he needs to vote with the party, or he loses
No, I'm saying
Democrats.
when Glenn Nye comes to Hampton Roads and does a small business roundtable and only invites the people from one side, that is not being a moderate.
Wow.
And I have seen him do it. And I've called him on it.
I know you have. Out of all the things we've discussed tonight, that's the one you can take to the bank. No question about it. So if we look on the other side of that, you've got, what, 6 candidates lined up in opposition. Yeah. 6. Who's the front runner at this point?
Ridgel.
Scott Ridgel, Freedom Ford guy? Yeah?
Terry McAuliffe was the front runner when he started too.
Okay, so you think it's too early to tell Republican strategists?
Well, Scott Ridgel is at least the one who has what appears to be from the outside the most active and engaged kind of campaign machine right now. We discussed it earlier. The governor-elect attended his campaign kickoff event earlier this week. He continues to say his eldest daughter, Janine, has already endorsed Scott Ridgel and done a video on his website. The governor-elect continues to say that his appearance at Mr. Ridgel's event is not necessarily indicative that he will endorse him as a candidate, but it's certainly a strong signal, and he has called him a longtime family friend. So when you've got the governor-elect behind you before, I might add, the nomination method is even finalized, that says something.
I think it's interesting, though, because you've got the breadth of the Republican Party in this race right now. So
you really do.
You really do. You have all corners, and it has as many corners as this table. And the question will be, which corner is going to win? I mean, it will give us a good idea about the Republican Party in that district.
I think it's going to be totally dependent, though, on nomination method.
It will.
Because the nomination method is going to really determine how they're going to. It seems to me they're not going to do a convention. They are unlikely to do a canvass after the mess they had in the McWaters-Wilson thing. If they do a primary, then that opens up a totally different thing. And I'm not sure that you can say who wins when you do a primary.
Well, I just want to say one thing. We got to everything that we talked about before the show that we said we were going to, and I didn't think that was possible. So we will continue the conversation, right? And I suspect that if Mr. Towns is still in office or in his position next week, we'll be coming back to that one too. We never got to the underwear bomber. What can I tell you? We'll do that in just a moment. I'll be back in a moment with a final thought. We parents are prepared to believe nearly anything that will preserve our good opinion of our children and, by extension, the job we've done raising them. So when a Nigerian father of 16 children was so distraught by his youngest son's growing radicalism that he visited the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria to share his concerns, it defies logic that this same son was reportedly granted a U.S. visa after that embassy visit. When I heard the news of the foiled Christmas Day jetliner bombing, I thought back to what I'd observed the week before in the Tampa airport. An elderly couple heading to visit their grandchildren for the holidays. Now, the woman, I promise you this is true, she could have passed for Mrs. Claus herself. She had her little white hair all swept up into a bun. She was carrying a little dog I was pretty sure would yap all the way to wherever it was they were going. And she had one of these Christmas sweaters that was so festive that it included all 12 of the days of Christmas. It was an astounding costume. Well, her husband was with her. He stepped up to the security arch and he said, "Now, I know I'm going to set that thing off because I've got nothing but metal from my hip to my ankle. It's a war injury," he said very proudly. Now, no surprise, the machine chirped, and the TSA agent yelled for a male to come search the shoeless veteran from The Greatest Generation. Well, could Mr. and Mrs. Claus have been terrorists? I suppose anything's possible. But our system subjected 2 people who in no way match any characteristic of any attack of the last 25 years to a search they found disrespectful, while we let fly a young man who matches several of those characteristics. He was from a wealthy family. He was educated in engineering. He had grown increasingly radicalized. He was denied a student visa in the UK because he was trying to enroll in a bogus college. He left Dubai, went to Yemen, cut off ties with his family. And oh yes, bought a one-way ticket with no luggage. Most importantly of all, his father waved a big red flag to get our attention. Now, my husband and daughter were scheduled to fly from London's Heathrow Airport on the very morning authorities foiled the plot to detonate liquid explosives on a transatlantic flight. That was August 10th, 2006, a date I promise you I will never forget. I don't mind removing my shoes. I don't mind limiting my liquids. But I do expect my government to be looking at people's stories while it looks for their devices. It was luck that bomb didn't work. It was courage that kept the fizzled bomb from crippling that plane. But that suspect should never have been on that plane in the first place. And if we don't start paying more attention to human nature and the stories of the people who want to wreak havoc on us, one day our luck will run out. Well, what do you think? We'd love to hear from you at any of a number of places where you can reach us. Our website, whatmatters.tv. You can email us at whatmatters@whro.org. Write to us here at the station. And of course, you can always watch past programs online anytime at our website. And if you do want to sign up for our weekly newsletter, we'll be glad to let you know what we're working on throughout the week. And now, if you just can't wait for more local talk till next Friday night and after tonight's show, I would not blame you for doing that. I hope you'll also join us on the radio dial for Hearsay on 89.5 WHRV. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Friday night for another look at What Matters.